Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's July 1st, 2020, and today I thought I'd give you a bit of an update on how the living fence along the western property line has been going so far. I'm pretty happy with it considering the amount of drought, the really super hot days, and lack of sufficient rain, because for the most part none of the living fence areas have been watered. So I thought what I do is throw the helmet cam on and we take a walk around. Hopefully, I know it's still early morning, hopefully we'll be able to see as the sun comes up the living fence features. So here we go. Okay, I'm on the western side of the property now, where the pond 5 is right over to my left here, and the curly willows bordering that. Very low water levels for this time of year for the pond. Due to the drought, but in front of me here are all of the black locust trees, and these help to create a nice wind barrier from the high western winds where we have open fields and much lower ground level here. One of the things I did this spring, which will be difficult to appreciate but we'll walk over, I went ahead and brought in many elderberry plants. So these are the ones that I started from hardwood cuttings last spring, spring of 2019. But as you could see all along in here, so in between each and every one of the black locust trees are the elderberries, and I think it's pretty fortunate, but the deer come through every day and browse all of these ones here. And that's one of my goals, is to make sure that we're providing nutrition and food resources for the wildlife that live on the property. So that fits in with our sanctuary. One of the things here, we've got some low level seed development here, where lower branches, where a lot of these I take off, but these are the black locust seeds here, the seed pods rather, and so we'll have quite a few black locust seeds, which I'll be propagating more of the black locust trees. But all in between each one of these black locust trees, and going all the way down to where, I don't know if you'd be able to see Bumblebee down there, the mini excavator, but it goes all the way down to where Bumblebee is at this point. And that's where I'm building more Hugelkultur beds and living fence lines down that far. But as I get time, I try to propagate the various levels along in this area. Now this is a stone wall underneath this area here, where I put some of the fill over time, but it drops way off. And many of these ash trees and trees that are the existing borderline are doing very poorly. They're getting old and they're going to age out, and I've been cleaning up the dead ones that blow over in the windstorms. And I'll be making several layers of this living fence as time goes on. But I'm pretty happy with how well those elderberries are doing. They're just expanding more and more of the root mass, and they'll be expanding out, and within 3 years it'll be just this big bushy area with the black locust sticking up between them. The figs are doing pretty well in here. We'll walk in, and the citrus are as well. I need to move things around, and now that they've become more adapted to being outside and all, I've got to get them out into the sun more. Here are many of the potted plants along this area. Now, there are black locust trees planted in here, and there's lilac bushes as well. And this creates a really nice barrier, and this is a place where I overwinter the potted plants down all along in this area. So these are plants that I'll be selling in the future: hostaberries, gooseberries, the various thornless blackberry plants. What else is over in here? I can't think of them right now. And right now I've got some plants on sale, the fig trees. But with this system where we have the natural border here, you could see some of the native grapevines are working their way over in this area, and as a result they're completely growing over the blueberry bushes that are in there that are in the back row. So I've got to come in and chop back a lot of this area here so I can get things cleaned up and get more light exposure to the plants that are in the back rows. Here are some of the elderberry plants that I'll sell as bare root plants this fall. They've done really well. Now certainly when you're doing hardwood cutting propagation, one of the things you want to do is remove the flower buds before they start to emerge and put on berries, because they can send more energy into the roots. But with our native, with all of our native elderberry varieties that we have here on site, they tend to do quite well without worrying too much. So now we're getting into some of the newer areas that I've been working with. So these are the elderberry plants that you saw in some of the videos me starting this spring. I've got some weeds to take care of here. This is the whole one of the big Hugelkultur pits here with Back to Eden, lots of wood chips on the surface of it. And I took a lot of leaves that I got from the town when they dropped off some leaves from cleaning up the cemetery. I took those leaves and heavily mulched this area, which really has turned out wonderfully. So each one of these elderberry plants are just sending out their roots, and you can see lots of expansion all around the base. Here, Mad Max. Here's extra sweet potatoes that I stuck in the soil over here. So this is for the wildlife as well. More sweet potatoes here, and you can see the elderberries. This one isn't doing quite as well as the rest. More sweet potatoes here, elderberries, sweet potatoes, watermelon, elderberry, and these are extra plants that I had. So we got a blue Hubbard squash here, sweet potato, blue Hubbard, another blue Hubbard there. Let's see, elderberries in this area. Some of the ones that are right up close to the fence don't do quite as well because they're exposed to the harsh elements. The soil can get dried out at the margins because it's just air right on the other side of that area. So the roots have got to work their way out in this direction. Now this fall I'll be planting trees all along in here as well, because this fence is going to gradually break down, and I want to hold this soil together so that we don't lose much soil down into my neighbor's property. Again, blue Hubbards, sweet potatoes, blue Hubbards, sweet potatoes, a couple of extra San Marzano tomato plants in here. The elderberry plants, sweet potatoes, squash, elderberry, squash, and so far these buggers have been doing really well, and the deer haven't come through and browsed on these very much at all. And so this one's this elderberry plant here is last year's one that I put into this area. So, and then the sweet potatoes are taking off. More watermelon here as well. Not bad for this drought. You know, you can see the tomatoes are falling over here some because they aren't faring as well with the drought. Horseradish in this area. Lilac bushes here. More horseradish. Some sage down here. We got more sage in here someplace. Yeah, not doing so well. Lilac bushes, elderberry bushes. Pretty good size elderberry bush here. And more horseradish in this area. Sage. Not sage. Horseradish, elderberry. Elderberry in this area. So this is an older Hugelkultur mound system, and I'm not doing it this way anymore. The rate of wood breakdown when it's up against a fence is much slower than the rate of wood breakdown when it's an individual mound that has both sides sloped, if you will. But as you see up here, I've changed the system quite a bit. So there's no Hugelkultur pits up to the bald cypress tree right here. So again, the elderberries grown in these wood systems, so these are the same age as ones you saw around the other side, and they aren't doing quite as well because I don't think they're getting as much nutrition available to the roots. And in this area they get the same amount of rainwater, but with this Hugelkultur system doesn't work quite as well as the system over on the other side. And of course the system on the other side has lots of leaf mulch, which I think really does a really good job, maybe a little bit better than the decomposing wood chips that are in this area. Now everything from this point on is an area where it's Hugelkultur pits. So what I did do was, before any of these wood chips were here, I came in and I excavated down and took tree trunks and branches and all and buried them all underneath the soil surface. I took the extra soil and used it in other places on the property because there was some decent topsoil here, and the gravel from underneath it I did go ahead and use for access roads in other areas. And then I covered up the wood, the logs underneath the soil, under the ground surface, and then I started putting limbs and branches, stuff that was 6 inches or smaller in diameter in this area, and then brought in the wood chips to cover it up here. These are some of the weeds from that I've been pushing down into this area, trying to cover up the area that I haven't dealt with yet. The wood chips help to suffocate them out, but the roots actually go over to the property line, and I'll end up pulling those out or whacking them off with a weed whacker, and I'll replant this whole area just like we have up here in the top. So this whole area here, if we went down approximately 4 feet from where I'm standing right now, that's where the logs are. And then limbs and branches on top of the ground, and then the wood chips intermixed in between all of those areas. What I'm trying to do here, and I'll be expanding wood chips up through the various blackberry plant areas up in here, and the deer have been getting through. They've been I put the fence up here, but they must be jumping this fence, because I could see they've been eating the tops of the blackberry plants off all along in here. Little Dickens. Alright, so once we get up into this area, this is the area that I planted last fall. So these are all black currants in this area. These are black currants, more black currants, all a row of black currants going right down this edge here. Got a curly willow here. I have to prune that one. And along the fence line here, this is where I started putting some of the acorns. So here's an oak, and of course there's some bindweed there. Wonderful. More bindweed. So I took the acorns and I put them all along the fence line here, and we'll see how well they do over the next couple of years, and I'll thin them out. Here's some more of the black currants. Now these would be much bushier if we didn't have the drought that we're having right now. But along the fence here you can see there's quite a few oak trees that have started. So I'm pretty happy with how things are going up in this area. In 2019, I came out and I deconstructed the only poorly successful Hugelkultur system that I had designed. And that's where, so no excavation was done below ground level up in this area. So there are no Hugelkultur pits below the ground level up in this area. But what I did do was I had stacked woody material up against the fence to about this height right here, and took compost and wood chips and covered it up, and it came out in a mound out to the ground level. The cold winds out of the west would hit the fence and dry out any moisture that was being retained by the mulch layer, and there was very poor decomposition of the woody material when I did it this way. Actually probably the fence line, the fence itself the cedar boards actually started to decompose faster than the wood that was in here. So I had that for 3 years. Dug part of it out to look at it and see how well things were breaking down, and I was really disappointed with the rate that the wood was breaking down. There were some areas where there was some mycelium in the wood, but it wasn't nearly like I've experienced with the other hugelkultur systems that we've had on site. So I elected, I think it was in March of 2019, I came up with the excavator. Everything was still frozen, but when I took the Hugelkultur system away and set the materials over in here, I had to separate the wood, and there's still some wood in this area. But whatever had decomposed and the wood chips had decomposed, I started spreading out in this area. And so I started filling in some of the low spots around in here. And this will be another type of perennial gardens that'll go in here, similar to the blackberry plantings that are down in that area. And hopefully I'll be able to fence this area off somewhat so that I'll be able to control some of the wildlife population in the area. So we'll see how these oak trees do over time and how the currants do. They seem to be tolerating the drought pretty well. The deer don't browse the black currants nearly as much as any of the other perennial berry producing plants. So these were the first ones I decided to put in to this area. And I could be pruning them back at this time, but you know, I'm just going to let things go at this point and try to catch up on other jobs. And we'll see how well these oak trees start to develop as time goes on, and whether I try to transplant some of them this fall or whether I just go ahead and leave them and prune back the ones that aren't looking good enough and the spacing isn't appropriate. Well, that's a brief tour of our western living fence line that we put in so far. I really love the black locust trees. They haven't been a problem. Like many people have had issues with black locust trees. Along that access road that borders it, we mow along that area. So any root suckers that come up, I haven't really noticed. It hasn't been an issue. The thorns haven't been an issue with them. Certainly propagating the black currants from hardwood cuttings, getting them to the point where they've got good root development, transplanting them along a living fence where you know the wildlife is going to be there. The deer haven't been a problem. I didn't know that we'd have a drought this year, a severe drought early on, and be so hot, but those black currants are hardy little buggers, and they've withstood all of the elements. Also, just direct seeding in a sense, using the acorns and running them along the fence line and just covering them up with some of the wood chips seemed to work pretty well. Yes, they're sporadically coming up. The squirrels got a lot of them, but that system worked as far as a relatively inexpensive way of beginning a living fence, as opposed to buying bare root trees and that sort of thing. We'll be collecting a lot of the black locust seed and propagating more of those plants potentially this fall if I can get to building some more air pruning beds as well. Super happy with the Hugelkultur pit system that's here. The area where I'm standing now is an area where there will be a high tunnel similar to a greenhouse but not heated, so we can extend our season. And off along the fence line there, the elderberries are really doing great. So those elderberry plants were the bare root elderberry plants that I was selling this spring. And you know, they're native to this property, and boy, these buggers just take off like crazy. And certainly the leaf mulch on the surface, putting it on really thick where you couldn't even see any of the elderberry plants initially, and they just sprung up through it and sending out their runners to the side. And they're doing, I think, extremely well, as long as they aren't right up against the fence itself. And now the fence here is anywhere between 3 foot and 5 foot above ground level on my neighbor's side. And with these elderberries going out and being so extensive with their root development, one of the things that happens is it helps to stabilize the soil. And if I can incorporate acorns along in there and get oak trees there, their long taproot system and lateral root systems will help to stabilize the soil as well. So we'll have to see. That way's north, that way's west, so we get northwest winter winds. That'll be really tough. So we'll have to see how those trees do during the winter months. And we'll see how well these elderberry plants can get massive over time and can create quite a visual barrier, be a good resource for medicinal herbs, and certainly be an excellent resource for wildlife, for the pollinators, the beneficial insects as well. And it happened to be a good place where I could put some extra plants in there, and why not create more biodiversity in the microbial community and provide a resource for the wildlife to consume as well during the summer and fall. So that's where we are so far with the living fence. I know it's a little rough first thing in the morning going through, and hopefully you'll be able to see with the GoPro camera mounted on my helmet. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends. And by all means, folks, stay safe, wear your mask, practice social distancing, and take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye now.